My name is Eleanor Vance. For as long as I can remember, my life has been a study in quiet precision. My father was a watchmaker, a man who found God in the intricate dance of gears and springs. He worked from a small, sun-drenched room at the back of our house in Portsmouth, the air thick with the scent of metal polish and focused silence. My mother was a weaver, her hands moving with a fluid grace that could turn spools of simple thread into complex tapestries of color and story. From them, I inherited not a love for their specific crafts, but a reverence for the act of creation itself, for the patience, the foresight, and the deep, abiding respect for the materials one chooses to build with. For 22 years, my material was code. My workshop was a company called Riverbend Dynamics. I was there at the beginning, when Riverbend was little more than a hopeful idea whispered over lukewarm coffee in a rented office space overlooking the Willamette River. There were 10 of us then, a small band of believers united by a shared vision. We wanted to build something different, something that could see patterns in the chaotic noise of the world and weave them into something clear, useful, and elegant. We called it the Loom. It wasn't just a product, it was a philosophy. The Loom was an artificial intelligence engine designed to learn and adapt, to find the hidden threads connecting disparate data points and reveal the larger picture. I wrote the first lines of its foundational code on a second-hand computer, my fingers moving with the same focused intent I'd watched in my parents' hands 1,000 times. Riverbend grew. Our little office became a full floor, then two, then a sleek, glass and steel building downtown that reflected the often gray Portsmouth sky. The Loom became our crown jewel, the engine that powered our success and made us a quiet giant in the world of data analytics. I was its architect, its gardener, its caretaker. I wasn't the face of the company. That was never my ambition. I was the foundation. I didn't walk the stages at tech conferences or charm investors over expensive dinners. I worked. I stayed late, debugging recursive loops that made younger engineers' eyes glaze over. I spent holidays refining predictive models, finding a quiet joy in the clean logic of a perfectly executed algorithm. Riverbend wasn't just my job, it was my tapestry, a life's work I was weaving one line of code at a time. And then, Julian Croft arrived. He was brought in as our new CEO, a decision made by a board that had grown more interested in stock prices than in the soul of the company we'd built. Julian was everything I was not. He was polished, sharp-tongued, and moved through our hallways with the predatory grace of a shark gliding through calm waters. He was younger than me by more than a decade, with a Cambridge accent and a wardrobe of impeccably tailored suits that seemed out of place in our more relaxed Pacific Northwest culture. He spoke a language of synergies, disruptions, and agile frameworks, words that felt hollow and synthetic compared to the solid, tangible thing we had built. He didn't need to tell me my time was limited. I saw it in the way his gaze would slide past me in meetings, as if I were a piece of outdated furniture. I felt it in the subtle shift of gravity within the company, pulling away from the builders and towards the sellers. The breaking point, for me, was a small, almost insignificant moment. During a presentation to a group of potential acquirers, he gestured vaguely in my direction. "And this is Eleanor Vance," he said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "A foundational contributor to our legacy systems." Legacy. The word hung in the air, cold and heavy. It's what you call a monument you're about to tear down. But Julian wasn't a fool. He was a strategist. He knew that the Loom, for all its power, had one final, critical layer of optimization that only I could complete. It was the master key, the sequence that would allow it to scale exponentially and make Riverbend an irresistible target for a public offering or a major acquisition. No one else had the institutional knowledge, the intimate understanding of its architecture. He couldn't get rid of me until I handed him the keys to the kingdom. So he kept me close, but at a distance. "Eleanor," he'd say, his voice smooth as polished river stone, "your expertise is invaluable to this final push. We're a team, and we're going to cross this finish line together." What he meant was, give me what I need and then you can fade away. I knew it. I understood the game. But what he didn't understand was that I had been weaving my own pattern all along. For months, I poured everything I had into finalizing the loom's core. I worked through the rainy Portsmouth nights, the city lights a soft blur through my office window. I integrated the autonomous learning module, fortified the data integrity protocols, and refined the neural pathways until they hummed with a quiet, efficient power. He sent me young, bright-eyed developers to assist and facilitate knowledge transfer. I taught them, patiently. I documented every process, every variable, every dependency. I created manuals so clear a novice could follow them. I was the perfect, compliant employee, preparing for my own obsolescence. Or so it seemed. The end came on a Tuesday, a day so gray and damp it felt like the sky was weeping. At 3:47 p.m., a calendar invitation appeared on my screen. Strategic realignment meeting. For 30 p.m. No agenda. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. I felt a strange and profound calm, the way a weaver feels when they are about to tie the final knot. I walked into the conference room on the top floor, the one with the panoramic view of the Fremont Bridge. Julian was there, of course, seated at the head of a long, dark wood table. Beside him was Clara from Human Resources, a woman whose professional warmth always felt manufactured. A single, tasteful manila folder sat on the polished surface between them. Julian didn't bother with pleasantries. Eleanor, he began, his tone a carefully calibrated blend of regret and corporate necessity. First, on behalf of the entire company, I want to express our deepest gratitude for your years of service. He paused, as if for effect. As Riverbend prepares for its next chapter, we're restructuring to become a leaner, more forward-facing organization. We're moving in a new direction. Clara slid the folder towards me. This packet outlines your severance package, she said softly. It includes 6 weeks of pay, continuation of your health benefits, and professional outplacement services to help with your transition. I looked at the folder, then at Julian's impassive face. The final deployment for the loom went live this morning at 10, I said, my voice even. The timing is purely a business decision, he replied, leaning back slightly, a posture of finality. This isn't personal. I stood up, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I looked out the window at the river below, a steady, powerful current that had been flowing long before any of us were here and would continue long after we were gone. No, I said, turning back to him. It isn't personal. It's a pattern. And a predictable one. I left the folder on the table, untouched. As I walked through the halls I had practically built, I saw the averted eyes, the sudden intense focus on computer screens. A few of the older engineers, my contemporaries, looked at me with a mixture of shock and sorrow. One of them, a kind man named Samuel, met my gaze and gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He knew. They all knew. At the elevator, I paused. On the wall was a newly installed poster, part of Julian's rebranding campaign. It showed a stylized, abstract river flowing into a vast, open ocean. The tagline read, "The future flows to the bold." How right he was. Back in my quiet, empty office, surrounded by the ghosts of 22 years of work, I powered on my personal laptop. I opened a file, not hidden in a folder labeled Revenge or Phase 2, but in a simple directory named The Gardener's Notebook. Inside was everything. My true work. The legal documentation, the timestamps from my personal servers, the independent patent filings. For the past 2 years, every significant innovation, every breakthrough I had made on the loom, had been developed on my own time, on my own hardware. I had logged every hour, documented every line of code, and filed for the intellectual property rights myself. I'd created a proprietary graft onto the main system, a core processing module that made the loom truly revolutionary. The version running on Riverbend servers was a beautiful, functional, but ultimately limited machine. The graft, The part that gave it its soul belonged to me. They thought they had fired a gardener. They had no idea they had just handed her the rights to the entire harvest. Firing me wasn't the end of my story. It was the trigger. The days that followed were a strange, quiet limbo. By Wednesday morning, my access to Riverbend's internal systems had begun to evaporate. Shared drives became inaccessible, my email signature was stripped of its title, and my security badge was deactivated remotely. It was a digital erasure performed with the cold, silent efficiency of a line of code. I was being unpersoned. Still, there was one final task. Julian had insisted, via a curt email from Clara, that I complete the knowledge transfer with the team now responsible for the loom. It was, of course, a transparent attempt to wring every last drop of value from me before the door was sealed shut. I agreed. Not for them, but for myself. It was the final, crucial scene in a play only I understood. The sessions took place in a sterile, glass-walled conference room. I sat at one end of the table, and a rotating cast of young developers sat at the other. They were bright, ambitious, and utterly convinced of their own brilliance. Their leader was a young man named Leo, barely 25, with a sharp haircut, an expensive watch, and a smirk that never quite left his face. He called me ma'am in a way that was meant to sound respectful but landed as deeply patronizing, as if I were a distant aunt explaining how to use a rotary phone. During one session, as I was explaining the intricacies of the data weaving algorithm, he held up a hand to stop me. Actually, he said, leaning back with an air of profound insight, I was reading an article last night that said this kind of neural architecture is becoming obsolete. We should probably just rewrite this whole module using a flux capacitor framework. I paused, a faint, weary smile touching my lips. That's a fascinating thought, Leo, I said, my voice gentle. Perhaps you can start on that rewrite as soon as you can explain the difference between a data ingress and a processing gate. A flush crept up his neck, and he fell silent. But Julian adored him. I'd overheard him on a call with a board member just a week earlier. Leo is a rock star, Julian had effused. A true next-gen talent. He's already taking the reins on the loom. He gets it? He gets it? I almost laughed. What Leo, and by extension Julian, got was a magnificent, handcrafted car with a beautiful chassis, a powerful engine, and a luxurious interior. What they didn't know was that I still held the only key to the ignition. The version of the loom they possessed could run diagnostics, it could perform basic functions, it could dazzle in a demonstration. But it couldn't scale. It couldn't perform the deep, adaptive learning that made it revolutionary. Without my proprietary graft, the soul of the machine, it would eventually hit a processing wall and collapse under any real-world, enterprise-level load. They thought my meticulous documentation was a final act of professional courtesy. They mistook my calm compliance for defeat. They had no idea that the core of the system, the part that truly mattered, existed only on my encrypted personal repository, under my name, filed with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office 6 months prior. I hadn't built it with their resources on their time or on their servers. Julian may have owned my title, but he did not own my mind. On Saturday evening, 4 days after my termination, my phone rang. The name on the screen was Serena Dash, the Executive Vice President of Strategy at Cortexa, Riverbend's largest and most innovative competitor. Her voice was warm, direct, and tinged with a knowing curiosity. "Eleanor," she said, without preamble. "I heard what happened at Riverbend. Unbelievable. I also have a strong suspicion they let go of something far more valuable than an employee." We met the following evening. Not in a stuffy corporate boardroom, but at a quiet table in a small, independent restaurant in the Pearl District, a place known for its food, not its scene. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted garlic. It was a meeting of two professionals, built on mutual respect, not power dynamics. "I believe I have something you might find interesting," I said, sliding my personal tablet across the table. For the next hour, I walked her through a live demonstration of the loom, my version. the true version. I showed her its ability to self-correct, to anticipate data trends with 99% accuracy, to weave terabytes of unstructured information into elegant, actionable intelligence in seconds. I showed her the graft, the core logic I had built, nurtured, and protected. Serena watched, her expression shifting from professional interest to focused intensity, and finally, to something approaching awe. "You built this," she said, her voice a near whisper. "This part, it's not theirs, is it?" "Every line is mine," I confirmed. "Documented, time-stamped, and patented." By the time the server brought our coffee, her decision was made. "My legal team will have a licensing agreement and an offer of employment drafted by morning," she said, her eyes alight with possibility. "We'd like to bring you on as our chief architect for AI systems." I gave a single, slow nod. "On one condition," I added. She smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile. "Let me guess. The announcement will be public, prominent, and will give you full, unambiguous credit as the creator." "Precisely," I said. "Done," she replied without hesitation. Walking out of the restaurant and into the cool, damp Portsmouth night, I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the wine or the cozy atmosphere. It wasn't the thrill of revenge. It was deeper than that. It was the quiet, profound hum of validation. It was the feeling of a story, my story, finally being told correctly. Riverbend Dynamics had tried to turn me into a footnote in their corporate history. On Monday morning, they would discover that I was the author of their next chapter. Monday dawned with a soft, promising light filtering through the clouds, the kind of morning in Portsmouth that feels like a clean slate. I woke early, but for the first time in 2 decades, I didn't feel the familiar pull of anxiety, the phantom weight of deadlines and expectations. I made coffee and drank it from a ceramic mug my mother had made, sitting at my kitchen table and watching the city slowly come to life. I was not rushing to Riverbend Dynamics. And yet, in a way, my entire day was orchestrated around them. At precisely 9 a.m., I clicked a link to a live webcast. It was Riverbend's all-hands town hall, an event to announce their bold new future. The screen glowed with the company's new branding, sleek, minimalist, and utterly devoid of the warmth we once had. Julian stood at a podium, looking confident and triumphant. "Today marks a new dawn for Riverbend Dynamics," he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. "Today, we officially unveil the culmination of our innovative spirit, the Loom. A revolutionary leap forward in enterprise intelligence, developed entirely by our world-class, in-house team." He spoke of next-generation leadership and disruptive vision. I waited, my breath held in a state of clinical observation. There was no mention of my name, no acknowledgement of the 22 years I had dedicated to building the very foundation he stood upon. No nod to the nights I'd spent sleeping on a cot in the server room, or the painstaking work of weaving together a system so complex no one else had ever fully grasped it. But he wasn't finished. And I want to give a special spotlight to the man who led the final charge and brought this project home, Julian announced, gesturing to the side of the stage. Leo's creativity, his passion, his relentless drive to push boundaries. This is the future of Riverbend. Leo stepped into the light, giving a small, self-conscious wave to the camera. He looked like a boy wearing his father's suit. I stared at the screen, a cold, hard clarity settling over me. They hadn't just fired me. They had committed an act of historical theft, live and in public. They were attempting to erase me from my own creation. The feeling inside me wasn't pain, it was the snap of a final thread breaking, releasing me completely. At 9:28 a.m., as Julian continued his speech, my phone vibrated with a text message. It was from Samuel, the kind-faced engineer. "Eleanor, are you watching this? They just gave Leo credit for your life's work. The whole engineering floor is in shock." "This is wrong." I typed back a single sentence. "The story isn't over yet, Samuel." At 10 a.m. sharp, a press release from Cortexa went live, distributed across every major newswire and tech journal. The headline was simple and devastating. Cortexa acquires exclusive licensing rights to the Loom core framework from inventor and chief architect Eleanor Vance. The statement went on to announce my new role and celebrate me as the visionary engineer behind the groundbreaking AI engine. My phone, which had been silent for days, began to light up like a starburst. Emails, text messages, LinkedIn notifications, calls from journalists. Former colleagues reached out, their messages a mix of confusion, outrage on my behalf, and dawning comprehension. It wasn't just a claim, it was official, backed by a fortress of legal documentation. I had the patents. I had the server logs. I had the code, with my name watermarked in every critical module. I had the truth. By 10:45 a.m., the tremors were beginning to shake the foundations of Riverbend. Another text from Samuel arrived. Emergency exec meeting. Julian looks like he's seen a ghost. IT is reporting that the Loom is throwing back major errors on the stress test servers. Legal is in a full-blown panic. They were finally attempting to push the system, to use it for the large-scale applications it was promised for. And they were discovering, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that the engine wouldn't start. The beautiful car had no key. I had given them a perfect map, but I had kept the compass. The real, scalable, adaptive logic, the graft, was my intellectual property. And now, Cortexa had exclusive rights to it. Legally. Irrevocably. Just after noon, an email from Julian himself landed in my inbox. The subject line was a single, desperate word, Eleanor. The message was brief. There appears to have been a significant misunderstanding regarding the IP for the Loom. I believe we should have a conversation to clarify the path forward. I didn't reply. I simply forwarded the email, without comment, to Serena Dash and the head of Cortexa's legal department. At 1 p.m., Cortexa issued a follow-up clarification, a masterstroke of corporate jiu-jitsu. It stated that any commercial application of the Loom's core adaptive logic would constitute a violation of Eleanor Vance's intellectual property rights and would require a licensing agreement directly with Cortexa, under terms set by Ms. Vance herself. By 2 p.m., the narrative had been ripped from Julian's control. The story was no longer about Riverbend's glorious future, it was about its catastrophic blunder. I received one last message from Samuel that afternoon. Leo is crying in the break room. Julian is shouting at the legal team. They've pulled the dev servers offline for forensic analysis. It's a total meltdown. I remained silent. I didn't need to shout or make accusations. I had laid the groundwork with the same patience and precision I used to write code. They had underestimated the quiet woman in the corner office. They thought my silence was weakness. They were learning, far too late, that my silence was focus. They hadn't erased me. They had, in their arrogance, unleashed me. By Tuesday morning, the story had transcended industry blogs and hit the mainstream financial press. The architect and the usurper, Riverbend's IP crisis. Who really built the Loom? How one fired engineer holds the key to a tech giant's future. My name, Eleanor Vance, was no longer a footnote. It was the headline. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. I received messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, old professors, former interns I had mentored, even respectful competitors. A surprising number of them were from other women in tech, their messages carrying an undercurrent of shared experience. One email, from a senior programmer at a well-known software company, simply said, "Thank you. You're fighting a battle for all of us who have been told to be grateful for a seat at the table we designed." I read that one 3 times. This was becoming about more than just me. At Cortexa, the atmosphere was electric. Serena treated me not just as a new hire, but as a strategic partner. Engineers, brilliant minds in their own right, came to my new, spacious office not with condescension, but with genuine curiosity. They asked questions about my design philosophy, about the ethical guardrails I had woven into the code. They listened. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in a room of peers who saw me, not as a legacy contributor, but as a creator. Mid-morning, I received an encrypted message from another former colleague, a quiet data scientist named Maria, whom I'd always respected for her integrity. Heads up, Eleanor. Julian is trying to spin this. He's telling the board it's a contractual ambiguity and that you were one of many contributors whose role was overstated. They're preparing a public statement to try and muddy the waters. I smiled. It was the predictable move of a man who had run out of good ones. They were still playing by the old rules of corporate warfare: deny, deflect, diminish. But the ground had already shifted beneath their feet. I waited until precisely 1 p.m., then released a brief, carefully worded statement through Cortex's legal team. As the registered inventor and sole patent holder of the Loom adaptive core, my focus remains on the continued innovation and ethical application of this technology. I will not engage in speculation, but I trust that all parties will respect the established and legally protected intellectual property rights. No anger. No accusations. Just the quiet, unshakable weight of the law. By 2:30 p.m., Riverbend's lawyers had made their first official outreach to Cortexa. They requested an exploratory dialogue about potential licensing structures. Serena and her team drafted the response, with my approval. The terms were firm. Licensing would be considered, but at a premium rate, triple the industry standard. And there was one non-negotiable condition. Any agreement would have to include a public, formal acknowledgement from Riverbend Dynamics of my role as the sole inventor of the core technology. That last part, I knew, would be the bitterest pill for Julian to swallow. It wasn't about the money, it was about the narrative. They would have to publicly admit they were wrong, that the woman they had cast aside was, in fact, the one person they could not afford to lose. That evening, I was invited to appear on a live virtual panel for a major tech publication. The topic was intellectual property, attribution, and corporate ethics in the AI era. I accepted immediately. As I prepared my notes, I felt a sense of calm purpose. I had spent a lifetime building things in the background. Now it was time to step into the light and speak for them. Back at Riverbend, the quiet exodus had begun. I received another message from Samuel. Maria just gave her notice. So did 2 of the best senior devs from the old team. Your name is on everyone's lips. Morale has hit rock bottom. I typed back a simple instruction. Tell them to check their email. Earlier that day, I had worked with Serena and Cortex's HR to draft personalized offers for 5 of Riverbend's most talented and most overlooked engineers. They were the quiet ones, the brilliant builders who, like me, had been sidelined by Julian's culture of flash over substance. By nightfall, all 5 had accepted. One wrote back, Eleanor, I would be honored to help you build the next chapter. I closed my laptop and walked to the large window in my new office. It overlooked the city, the lights of Portsmouth glittering like a scattered handful of jewels. They had tried to write me out of my own story. Now, the entire industry was watching me write the next one. And this time, I was holding the pen. Wednesday morning was a blur of motion and light. I sat in a broadcasting studio at Cortexa headquarters, a small, professional space with soundproofed walls and soft, flattering lights. A tiny microphone was clipped to my lapel, and a calm-faced producer gave me a thumbs up through the glass. On the screen in front of me, a digital countdown ticked to 0. Welcome to Tech Forward Live, the host said, his image crisp and clear from a studio in New York. Our guest today is a name that has been on the forefront of everyone's mind in the tech world this week, Eleanor Vance, the inventor of the revolutionary Loom framework and the newly appointed chief AI architect at Cortexa. Eleanor, it's a privilege to have you with us. Thank you for having me, I replied, my voice steady. The interview lasted for 25 minutes. I spoke about my work not as a weapon, but as a craft. I described the philosophy behind the Loom, how I designed it to mimic the interconnected, organic patterns of nature, how I built ethical safeguards into its deepest layers to prevent bias. I spoke of the importance of attribution, not for the sake of ego, but for the integrity of the creative process itself. I never once mentioned Julian Croft by name. I didn't have to. Every word I spoke about methodical work, about quiet dedication, about the legal and moral ownership of one's creation, was a direct, devastating counterpoint to the narrative he had tried to build. When it was over, #EleanorVance and #OwnYourWork were trending. 30 minutes after the interview aired, Riverbend's stock, which had been bleeding slowly, took a sharp nosedive, dropping another 8%. Serena walked into my office, not with a triumphant grin, but with a look of quiet, focused satisfaction. On the table, she placed a file. "The keynote invitation for the Global AI Summit," she said. "They want you for the closing address." I opened the folder. My name was there in bold type, for a spot I had been told for years was reserved for more dynamic, public-facing leaders. At 11:45 a.m., Samuel, who had officially accepted his offer at Cortexa and was serving out his last week at Riverbend, sent me a final update. "Emergency board meeting in session. Julian is trying to hold on, but the investors are calling. They know the technology is a hollow shell without you." By 1 p.m., the first wave of resignations hit the news cycle. The 5 engineers I had recruited had timed their departures to be simultaneous. It sent a powerful message. The talent, the core of the company's institutional knowledge, was leaving with me. At 2:15 p.m., a formal letter arrived from Riverbend's outside counsel. It was a letter of surrender, couched in legal jargon. They were formally requesting negotiations for the immediate licensing of the Loom adaptive core to mitigate further financial and reputational damage. I forwarded it to our legal team with a single line: "The terms remain unchanged." Cortexa's public response was a masterpiece of professional dominance. "We are open to discussing a licensing agreement with Riverbend Dynamics, subject to their public acknowledgement of Ms. Vance's sole inventorship and a premium enterprise fee structure. Unauthorized use of the patented framework will be met with swift legal action." The final act came at 3 p.m. Riverbend called a hasty press conference. Julian stood at the podium, looking haggard and diminished. His tailored suit seemed to hang off his frame. He began to speak, his voice strained. "There have been some misconceptions that I would like to address regarding our valued former colleague." He never finished the sentence. 5 minutes into his faltering speech, the large screen behind him, meant to display the Riverbend logo, flickered. Then it switched to a live feed of my Tech Forward live interview. Someone in the media pool, or perhaps a sympathizer inside Riverbend's own AV team, had made a choice. My calm, confident face filled the screen, my voice speaking clearly about patents, timelines, and the documented proof of my work. The room fell into a stunned silence. Julian froze, a deer caught in the headlights of his own undoing. The image was stark, his frantic, crumbling defense versus my poised, factual account. By 4 p.m., the board of Riverbend Dynamics issued its own, separate statement, overriding their defunct CEO. It was brief and brutal, effective immediately. "Julian Croft has stepped down from his position as Chief Executive Officer. The board is actively working to resolve the current IP issues and stabilize the company." I read the news alert on my phone, standing by my window, watching the rain begin to fall on the city. The storm had broken. That evening, Serena raised a glass of champagne in the Cortexa boardroom. "To telling the truth," she said, her eyes sparkling. "And to making sure it's heard," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. We drank to the future, a future I was now free to build on my own terms. A year to the day after I was escorted out of Riverbend Dynamics, I walked onto the main stage at the Women in Tech Global Leadership Summit. The auditorium was vast, the lights warm, the air humming with the energy of thousands of women, engineers, executives, founders, and students. In the front rows, I saw the faces of the team I had built at Cortexa, including Samuel and Maria, their expressions proud and serene. The applause began before I reached the podium, a rolling wave of warmth and recognition. I took a deep, steadying breath and looked out at the sea of faces. 1 year ago, I began, my voice clear and amplified through the hall. I was let go from a company I had spent 22 years helping to build. I wasn't fired for failure. I was fired for succeeding too quietly. A hush fell over the room. For most of my career, I believed that the work should speak for itself. I believed that integrity, dedication, and excellence were their own rewards. And they are. But I learned that they are not always enough. I learned that you can build the house, lay the foundation, wire every room, and still have someone else put their name on the front door and try to change the locks. The applause this time was a roar, a cathartic release that seemed to come from a place of deep, shared understanding. When my keynote was over, a long line of women formed to speak with me. They didn't just want to shake my hand, they wanted to share their stories. A young data scientist told me she had started meticulously documenting her personal projects after reading about me. A VP of engineering at a rival firm said she had successfully challenged her company's patent attribution policy. But it was a young woman, an intern with wide, earnest eyes, who said the words that resonated the most. "They always tell us to be grateful just to have a seat at the table," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "Watching you, I realized we can build a better table. Or we can build a whole new room." I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Yes," I said to her. "We always could." That night, back in my office at Cortexa, a space that now felt less like an office and more like a command center for a quiet revolution, a plain white envelope was waiting on my desk. It was made of thick, expensive cardstock with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. The handwriting was unmistakable. "Eleanor." There is no version of this story where I come out looking like anything other than what I was, a fool. I was arrogant, and I was threatened by a type of power I didn't understand, the power of quiet, undeniable competence. I thought I could take the work and erase the creator. I have lost everything I thought was important. My career is over. But you, it seems, have reclaimed the one thing they could never truly give you, your own name. Julian. I read the note twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a desk drawer. I felt no triumph, no lingering anger. Only a sense of closure, like a final, complex tapestry being cut from the loom, its story complete. A few weeks later, an invitation arrived from a federal oversight committee. They were creating a new national advisory board on AI ethics and development. They asked me to chair it. I accepted. My work was no longer just about writing code. It was about rewriting the rules. I had fought to own my story, and in doing so, I had inadvertently become a story for others. Now, my purpose was to help build a world where the next Eleanor Vance wouldn't have to fight so hard, a world where the work and the creator are inseparable, and where no one's contribution, no matter how quiet, can ever be erased.